In the West, white rice is treated like pure sugar. We're told it spikes insulin, fuels inflammation, and leads directly to belly fat and diabetes. Yet, there's a biological contradiction science can't ignore. The Japanese eat white rice almost every day and remain one of the leanest populations on Earth. For decades, the explanation was good genetics. But modern research has dismantled that idea. When Japanese individuals move west and adopt our eating patterns, visceral fat rises just as fast, sometimes faster. So the problem was never the rice. The problem is the biological system surrounding the meal. In today's video, titled The Japanese Protocol to Force Visceral Fat Loss, Science-Based, we're not talking about culture, tradition, or discipline. We're talking about enzymes, hormones, insulin, cortisol, and neural signals, the real forces that decide whether your body stores fat or burns it. You'll discover why the Japanese eat carbohydrates without insulin chaos, stay leptin-sensitive without eating less, burn visceral fat without extreme workouts. This is not another weight loss trick. This is a biological blueprint you can apply inside a modern lifestyle. If you've dieted, fasted, exercised, yet belly fat refuses to leave, watch this video until the end. And if you want to understand how your body actually works instead of chasing hacks, subscribe to the channel for more science-based explanations. Pillar 1. Natto. Not for burning fat, but for paving the way for fat to be eliminated. When most people talk about fat loss, especially visceral fat, the conversation usually begins with the same assumption. To burn fat, you need to stimulate fat burning. The focus is on thermogenic compounds, intense workouts, or aggressive strategies designed to force the body to burn energy. But this approach overlooks a critical biological barrier. Before fat can be burned, it must first be able to leave the fat cell. And visceral fat, in particular, is notoriously difficult to mobilize. The danger of visceral fat doesn't come from stubbornness alone. It comes from its environment. Visceral fat is poorly vascularized. Compared to subcutaneous fat, it receives significantly less blood flow. With limited circulation, fatty acids struggle to exit the fat cell and enter the bloodstream where they can be used as fuel. In other words, even if your body sends a signal to burn fat, visceral fat may remain trapped simply because there's no efficient transport system. This is a biological constraint that most weight loss strategies never address. The Japanese approach does not begin with the question, how do we burn more fat? Instead, it starts with a more fundamental one. How do we allow fat to be released in the first place? One of the most important answers to that question lies in a fermented food that rarely appears in Western discussions about metabolism: natto. Natto is not consumed for its taste, nor is it marketed as a fat-burning food. Its primary metabolic value comes from an enzyme produced during fermentation known as nattokinase. This enzyme doesn't burn fat directly. What it does is arguably more important. It improves microcirculation. Nattokinase supports the breakdown of fibrin structures in the blood, helping blood flow more freely at the microvascular level. When circulation improves, tissues that are normally undersupplied with blood, including visceral fat, become reconnected to the body's energy transport network. Once blood flow improves, fatty acids can finally leave the fat cell, enter circulation, and be oxidized. Only at this point does fat burning truly become possible. This explains why many people exercise and diet correctly, yet see little change in visceral fat. The issue isn't effort or discipline, it's biological infrastructure. But natto operates on an even deeper level. Beneath its enzymatic effects lies a sophisticated hormonal mechanism. Natto is one of the richest dietary sources of vitamin K2. While vitamin D is often discussed in bone health, vitamin K2 serves as a critical activator for a lesser-known hormone called osteocalcin. Biologically, bones are not inert structures. They function as an endocrine organ. When osteocalcin is properly activated, it plays a direct role in metabolic regulation. It signals the pancreas to improve insulin responsiveness and communicates with fat tissue to stimulate the release of adiponectin, a hormone closely associated with fat oxidation and insulin sensitivity. Vitamin K2 is required to activate osteocalcin. Without it, this hormonal loop remains incomplete. With sufficient K2, Bones shift from being passive structures to becoming active metabolic allies, supporting flexibility in energy use and discouraging visceral fat storage. What's remarkable is that the Japanese do not consume natto with fat loss in mind. It's simply part of a traditional breakfast. Yet that habit quietly establishes a beneficial biological feedback loop, enhancing circulation, preserving insulin sensitivity, and gradually removing the survival advantage of visceral fat. Rather than forcing the body into a stressed, fat-burning state, they create an internal environment where visceral fat no longer has a reason to exist. Pillar 2. White rice that isn't naked. Once we understand that visceral fat can only retreat when the biological infrastructure allows it to be released, the next question becomes unavoidable. How can the Japanese eat white rice regularly without triggering insulin chaos? The answer lies not in the quantity of rice, but in the biological context surrounding it. In Western diets, carbohydrates often appear alone, hot, fast, and consumed in a state of urgency. In Japanese cuisine, rice is rarely eaten naked. It is almost always paired with elements that fundamentally change the body's biochemical response. The first mechanism activates immediately in the mouth and small intestine and can be described as an acid break. Traditional Japanese meals frequently pair rice with vinegar, pickled vegetables, or fermented miso soup. These foods introduce biologically active acids, such as acetic acid and lactic acid. When acids are consumed alongside starch, they interact with a key digestive enzyme, alpha amylase, which is responsible for breaking starch into glucose. Acid doesn't destroy this enzyme, but it significantly slows its activity. As a result, starch is no longer rapidly converted into glucose. Instead of flooding the bloodstream, glucose enters gradually and steadily. Blood sugar peaks are lower, insulin responses are milder, and the pancreas is not forced into emergency regulation. A simple sour side dish can flatten the glucose curve in a meaningful way. This explains why the same bowl of rice produces a completely different metabolic outcome depending on how it is consumed. But the acid break is only the first layer of protection. The second layer is more subtle and rooted in the physical chemistry of starch, resistant starch. In Japan, rice is often eaten at room temperature. Bento boxes, onigiri, sushi, or cooled rice are common. When cooked starch is cooled, its molecular structure changes through a process called retrogradation. A portion of the starch becomes resistant to digestion. Resistant starch is not broken down into glucose in the small intestine. It does not spike blood sugar or insulin. Instead, it travels to the large intestine, where it feeds gut bacteria. These bacteria ferment resistant starch and produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate. Butyrate supports gut health and functions as a signaling molecule that improves insulin sensitivity and enhances fat oxidation at the cellular level. This creates a fascinating paradox. Rice, when prepared and consumed differently, stops acting like a rapid glucose source and becomes a metabolic ally. The Japanese do not eat fewer carbohydrates. They eat carbohydrates in a way that removes biological stress. An important downstream effect of resistant starch is known as the second meal effect. When a meal contains resistant starch, the fermentation process continues for hours, influencing how the body handles glucose at the next meal. A strategically designed lunch can improve insulin sensitivity at dinner, even if dinner includes carbohydrates. The body shifts from a reactive state to a prepared one. All of this leads to a crucial insight. The problem is not carbohydrates themselves, but the speed and biological context in which they enter the system. When glucose enters slowly, insulin does not spike. When insulin remains stable, visceral fat does not receive a storage signal. And when storage signals disappear, visceral fat gradually loses its purpose. The Japanese do not fight carbohydrates. They domesticate them through biology. Pillar 3. SHINRIN-YOKU. Lowering cortisol to make fat lose. After understanding how the Japanese handle carbohydrates to prevent insulin overload, a crucial question remains. Why does visceral fat sometimes persist even when blood sugar is under control? The answer lies in a hormone often underestimated in fat loss discussions: cortisol. Cortisol is not inherently bad, but when chronically elevated, it becomes a powerful survival signal, and survival biology prioritizes storage. Cortisol is the hormone of stress and vigilance. When cortisol is high, the body interprets the environment as unsafe. In that state, burning fat is risky, while storing energy, especially visceral fat, is protective. Elevated cortisol activates lipoprotein lipase, LPL, an enzyme that pulls fatty acids into fat cells. When LPL is active, visceral fat is not only preserved, but effectively locked in place. This is why someone can eat well and exercise consistently, yet struggle to lose belly fat. The biological message is still, prepare for threat. The Japanese do not attempt to suppress cortisol through willpower or mental discipline. Instead, they structure daily life in ways that allow cortisol to naturally decline. One of the most important practices is SHINRIN-YOKU, often translated as forest bathing. While the term sounds poetic, in Japan it is a recognized medical therapy. Physicians prescribe time in natural environments to help manage hypertension, anxiety, and chronic stress. The biology behind SHINRIN-YOKU is rooted in chemistry and neuroscience. When walking among trees, the body inhales volatile organic compounds released by plants, known as phytoncides. These compounds have been shown to reduce salivary cortisol levels, lower blood pressure, and enhance parasympathetic nervous system activity within as little as 15 to 20 minutes. This is a measurable physiological response, not a subjective feeling. Beyond air chemistry, there is visual neurobiology. The human brain evolved in natural environments long before cities existed. It is particularly attuned to fractal patterns, the repeating, self-similar shapes found in leaves, branches, clouds, and waves. These patterns are processed effortlessly by the brain, inducing a state known as soft fascination, where attention is gentle and restorative. Modern urban environments, by contrast, are dominated by straight lines, sharp angles, screens, and signage. Processing this geometry requires directed attention, which is cognitively demanding and increases stress. Prolonged exposure elevates cortisol, signaling that danger may still be present. Biologically, this keeps visceral fat in a protected, stored state. SHINRIN-YOKU interrupts this loop by delivering a simple message: the environment is safe. As cortisol drops, LPL activity decreases. When LPL is no longer aggressively pulling fat into storage, visceral fat loses its survival advantage. Only then can stable insulin signaling and improved circulation translate into actual fat oxidation. In this sense, lowering cortisol does not burn fat directly, it permits fat to be burned. Importantly, a Japanese forest is not required. The biological principle remains intact. A park, a tree-lined path, or even a screen-free walk in a natural setting can replicate the effect. Slow movement, calm breathing, and visually natural environments shift the nervous system from defense to recovery. In recovery mode, energy storage is no longer a priority. The Japanese do not force stress reduction. They design life so that stress does not persist unnecessarily. As a result, visceral fat gradually becomes redundant. When the outside world is perceived as safe, the body finally releases what it once held for survival. Pillar 4. HARA HACHI. Eat up to 80% so hormones can speak up. Even when insulin is well regulated and cortisol is no longer constantly signaling danger, another decisive factor still governs visceral fat: how the brain recognizes satiety. Most people assume eating behavior is a matter of willpower: eat less, restrain more, try harder. Biology tells a different story. The issue is not whether you want to stop eating, but whether the satiety signal reaches your brain in time. The central hormone in this process is leptin. Leptin is released from fat tissue and the gut and acts as a messenger to the hypothalamus, informing the brain that energy needs have been met. However, leptin does not act instantly. From the moment food enters the stomach to the moment the brain receives and processes the signal, it takes approximately 15 to 20 minutes. This biological delay cannot be overridden by discipline or speed. Problems arise when modern eating habits move faster than this signal. When a person eats to 100% or even 110% fullness, by the time leptin finally reaches the brain, the body is already in an energy surplus. The brain must then manage this excess by activating storage pathways. Repeating this pattern day after day gradually leads to leptin resistance, a state in which the brain becomes less responsive to the hormone. Hunger persists even when energy stores, including fat, are abundant. Leptin resistance creates a dangerous paradox. The body is energy-rich, but the brain behaves as if it is deprived. In this state, visceral fat is not only preserved, but actively protected. Fat loss becomes difficult not because of poor discipline, but because the signaling system is distorted. The Japanese approach this problem through a principle known as HARA HACHI, eating until roughly 80% full. Importantly, 80% is not a mathematical target but a biological one. It represents the point where hunger has faded but physical fullness has not yet arrived. Stopping at this threshold accounts for leptin's delay. 20 minutes later, when the signal reaches the brain, the system registers satisfaction and shuts down further intake. Crucially, HARA HACHI does not rely on suppression or restraint. It works with the nervous system rather than against it. People stop eating when hunger subsides, not when the stomach is stretched. This preserves leptin sensitivity, keeps the brain receptive to satiety signals, and prevents the cycle of overeating from forming. A powerful physical support for this principle is eating speed. In Japanese culture, chopsticks play an unintentional but significant biological role. Chopsticks, naturally slow eating, encourage smaller bites and extend chewing time. This slower pace gives hormones like leptin, CCK, and GLP-1 the time they need to communicate with the brain before overconsumption occurs. Compared to forks or spoons, which allow large, rapid bites, chopsticks introduce a small behavioral friction with a large physiological impact. They transform eating into a rhythmic process rather than a rapid energy intake. That rhythm helps the brain distinguish enough from too much. And when leptin sensitivity is preserved, the benefit extends beyond reduced intake. More importantly, the body no longer perceives an energy threat. In that state, visceral fat loses its role as a protected reserve. It becomes accessible fuel. HARA HACHI is therefore not a dieting trick, but a neurohormonal hack that restores the body's original energy regulation system. Pillar 5. Green tea maintains the fat-burning signal for longer. After insulin has been stabilized, cortisol lowered, and the satiety system resynchronized, a subtle yet decisive question remains. Why does the same fat-burning signal persist in some people but fade quickly in others? The answer lies in the lifespan of a key neurohormonal messenger, norepinephrine, the hormone that instructs fat cells to release stored energy. Norepinephrine acts as the unlock switch for fat stores. When it binds to receptors on fat cells, it initiates lipolysis, allowing fatty acids to be released and used as fuel. The challenge is that norepinephrine is short-lived. The body produces an enzyme specifically designed to deactivate it, COMT-catechol, O-methyltransferase. COMT functions as a cleanup mechanism, rapidly breaking down norepinephrine to return the nervous system to baseline. In modern physiology, COMT often works efficiently, causing fat-burning signals to dissipate quickly. You may trigger lipolysis through light movement, intermittent fasting, or walking. But if norepinephrine is degraded too fast, the effect is brief. This is where green tea enters as a quiet but powerful biological tool. Green tea is rich in EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, a polyphenol that inhibits COMT activity. When COMT is suppressed, norepinephrine is broken down more slowly. This does not mean the body produces more of the hormone. Rather, it extends the duration of an existing fat-burning signal. Biologically, this is a highly efficient strategy. Instead of pushing the system harder, green tea allows the signal to work longer. This effect aligns perfectly with the Japanese metabolic philosophy. Green tea is not a strong stimulant. It does not force the nervous system into overdrive. It fine-tunes timing. With norepinephrine sustained, fat mobilization becomes steady and prolonged, reducing the need for extreme interventions. The result is a calm, persistent, fat-burning state, rather than short-lived spikes followed by fatigue or compensation. Beyond signal duration, green tea also influences brown adipose tissue, metabolically active fat that burns calories to generate heat. EGCG modestly activates brown fat, increasing baseline energy expenditure without intense activity. Brown fat functions like a biological heater, consuming energy naturally, particularly in cooler environments. Another critical factor is the combination of caffeine and L-theanine found in green tea. Caffeine levels are lower than in coffee and are buffered by L-theanine, an amino acid that promotes relaxation and increases alpha brainwaves associated with calm focus. The result is smooth, sustained energy without anxiety, and most importantly, without elevating cortisol. This matters because fat-burning signals are only useful when they do not simultaneously activate survival stress. Green tea supports alertness and gentle activity while keeping the nervous system calm. Cortisol remains stable, LPL is not reactivated, and visceral fat is not locked back into storage. The Japanese do not drink green tea as a weight loss tactic. It is simply part of daily rhythm. Yet that habit quietly optimizes a crucial variable: the longevity of fat-burning signals. Once insulin is stable, cortisol is low, and leptin sensitivity is preserved. Extending norepinephrine activity becomes the final refinement that allows fat loss to occur meaningfully. Green tea does not make the body burn more. It helps the body burn long enough. And in biology, that gentle persistence is often what creates lasting change. When we step back and examine the full system, a critical truth becomes clear. The Japanese don't lose fat the way we've been taught to think about fat loss. They don't starve the body, overwhelm hormones, or try to overpower biology with willpower. Instead, they systematically remove every reason the body has to protect visceral fat. The first pillar restores circulation and activates the bone hormone axis, giving fat a pathway to exit. The second pillar domesticates carbohydrates, allowing glucose to enter the bloodstream slowly so insulin never needs to panic. The third pillar lowers cortisol, signaling safety to the nervous system so fat is no longer locked in survival mode. The fourth pillar preserves leptin sensitivity, allowing the brain to recognize when enough is enough. And the final pillar extends fat-burning signals, ensuring the process lasts long enough to matter without disrupting hormonal balance. No single pillar works in isolation. This is not a collection of tips. It is a coordinated sequence of biological signals. When these signals align, the body does not need to be forced to burn fat. It does so naturally, because it is the most rational biological outcome. This also explains why so many people diet, exercise, and fast, yet still struggle with visceral fat. It's not because they failed. It's because they changed behavior without changing the underlying biological message. The body only releases what it no longer believes is necessary for survival. And that leads to the core message of this video. You don't need to force your body to get lean. You need to give it no reason to stay fat. If you've felt frustrated by traditional weight loss advice, if you want to understand your body instead of fighting it, this is only the beginning. Subscribe to the channel and watch until the end, because every video here is designed to help you decode your own biology so fat loss becomes a natural consequence of understanding, not a battle of control.